right now in Kyoto, in a quiet wooden tea house. Older than most countries, a woman begins a dance she has practiced thousands of times. Silk sleeves drift like water. Her feet glide across the floor without a sound. You've seen her image before in movies, travel magazines, and half-forgotten novels, the mysterious woman in white makeup. You think you know who she is. But the truth is very different. This is the real history of the geisha. Not the fantasy, the reality. Here's the paradox. One of the most recognizable cultural icons on Earth is also one of the most misunderstood. Ask almost anyone in the Western world what a geisha is, and you'll hear a familiar mix of answers. Mystery, beauty, and then confusion. Because the image most people carry is not history. It is narrative. A narrative shaped by distance, by fascination, and by retelling. So, where does this illusion come from? Partly from the stories we consume. Films, novels, interpretations layered upon interpretations. Memoirs of a geisha became, for many, the story, even though it was imagined from the outside. But the deeper misunderstanding emerged in a more chaotic moment. After war. When American soldiers arrived in Japan, they encountered a culture without context. The phrase, geisha girl, began to circulate. A simplification that erased important distinctions. In that confusion, appearance replaced truth. Imitation replaced identity. And the misunderstanding settled into memory. This is how distortion happens, quietly, gradually. Not through intention, but through repetition. A story told enough times begins to feel real. So let's look closer. The word itself is the first clue. The term geisha emphasizes entertainment, artistry, and performance. The first character, gei, is the same found in words for the arts, artist, and performing arts. So, geisha literally means person of art, not woman of mystery, not exotic entertainer, person of art. The term itself is not necessarily even gendered. Historians note that the first geisha were actually men. This surprises almost everyone. The first geisha were male entertainers, known as taikomochi or hokan, appearing around the year 1730. It was only about 20 years later that female geisha began to appear, and they quickly took over the profession, dominating it by 1780. Think about what that means. The icon we associate with Japanese femininity. That white face, that red lip, those delicate silk sleeves, began with men in banquet halls, telling jokes. History rarely gives us the origin stories we expect. A geisha is a skilled artisan proficient in singing, dancing, and playing the shamisen, a traditional lute-like instrument. In addition to these essential talents, a geisha excels in the art of conversation and may also showcase proficiency in flower arranging, conducting tea ceremonies, or calligraphy. What geisha do is not performance in the way we think of a concert or a stage show. It is something more intimate, more demanding, closer to what we might call presence. The art of making another person feel, for an evening, that they are the most important person in the world. Geisha were diplomats of refinement, custodians of etiquette, and masters of omotenashi, the Japanese concept of exceptional hospitality. Omotenashi. It does not translate cleanly into English. It means hospitality that anticipates your needs before you know you have them, warmth that costs the giver everything and asks nothing of the receiver. That is what geisha were trained to embody. Not fantasy, not availability. Presence. To understand how geisha became geisha, we need to go back to a world very different from our own. Japan, 17th century. The Edo period. A country sealed off from the outside world by its own rulers, the Tokugawa shogunate, for over 2 centuries. No trade, no foreign diplomats, no Western ideas. Inside this sealed world, a uniquely Japanese urban culture flourished. One obsessed with refinement, performance, and a concept called mono no aware, the bittersweet awareness of impermanence. Cherry blossoms beautiful because they fall, youth precious because it ends. In the designated pleasure quarters of Edo period cities, a variety of cultural figures existed. There were tayu, courtesans skilled at acting and the traditional arts, and odoriko, chaste teenage dancers for hire. Both were precursors of the modern geisha. The original role of geisha was as an assistant to the oiran, high-class and expensive Japanese courtesans who resided in the pleasure quarters of Edo, Kyoto, and other major cities. As the courtesans feared geisha stealing their customers, regulations at the time actually forbade geisha from forming personal relations with clients. They were not even allowed to sit near guests. The great irony of geisha history is that they were legally prevented from doing the very thing the world would later accuse them of. However, patrons visiting the courtesans gradually began to gravitate towards the less expensive and more socially accessible geisha. And by the 1800s, geisha were largely replacing oiran as the center of parties. Why? Because conversation, apparently, outlasted novelty. Because being seen and heard, really heard, was worth more than spectacle. By the 19th century, geisha had become cultural royalty. Throughout the 19th century, geisha enjoyed a golden age of popularity, and their reputation as profoundly elegant, remote, and mysterious was cemented. At their peak, there were as many as 80,000 geisha throughout Japan. 80,000. Let us talk about what it actually takes to become a geisha. Because this, more than anything else, separates the reality from the myth. Young women, often between the ages of 15 and 20, enter a 5-year apprenticeship to become fully fledged geisha. During this time, they are known as Maiko, a designation that carries both cultural prestige and symbolic beauty. Maiko learn music, calligraphy, tea ceremony, and classical dance in service of cultivating presence, refinement, and the ability to entertain with grace. Maiko begin their journey as shikomi, performing chores and basic duties within the okiya. After rigorous training, they debut as Maiko in a special ceremony called misunderstanding. Eventually, a Maiko transitions into a full-fledged geisha during another ceremony known as arake. The arake, the turning of the collar. It is the moment when a trainee's collar changes from red to white, from apprentice to artist. It sounds simple. It takes years. During training, each Maiko is attached to in one san an older sister, a fully fledged artist who will act as her mentor. Maiko training consists of 3 elements: training in the formal arts, practice in conversation and entertainment, and networking. Navigating the complex society of the hanamachi, which means geisha district. Networking. That word feels almost jarring here, like checking LinkedIn in a no theater. But it is real. The world of the geisha is a web of relationships, obligations, and trust. You do not simply perform, you belong. The stereotypical image of a woman with white makeup, elaborate hairstyle, and ornate kimono is actually typical of Maiko, or trainee, not a fully fledged geisha. By contrast, fully fledged performers will generally wear subdued colors and minimal makeup. They dazzle with their skills and personality, not with their elaborate clothing. This is striking when you sit with it. The image the whole world uses to represent geisha is actually a picture of a student. The true master goes unrecognized. The world is dazzled by the costume of the learner. Here is a question people rarely ask about geisha. Were they liberated? By the standards of pre-modern Japan, the answer complicated, contested, and worth sitting with is sometimes yes. Though often portrayed as submissive and subservient to their male clients, the geisha world has historically offered women the opportunity for increased autonomy and economic independence, something they could never hope for in any other profession. Performers were taught to manipulate their clients with their wits and thus enjoyed an unprecedented position of power in traditional Japanese society. Manipulate is a charged word, but let us be honest about what it means here. In a society where women had almost no legal standing, no ownership rights, and no voice in public life, the geisha had something extraordinary. A room full of powerful men hanging on her words. She chose what she said. She chose what she revealed. She chose how the evening felt. That is not powerlessness. That is a particular, hard-won, very specific kind of power. Though women in Japan today have many more opportunities, the profession of geisha is still seen by some as a way for a woman to express her independence and liberate herself from societal pressures such as the expectation to get married and start a family. Some feminists disagree with this interpretation, however, and continue to view their world as exploitative and backward. Both things can be true. Institutions can offer freedom and constraint simultaneously. The geisha world was never a utopia. It had hierarchies, obligations, and histories of exploitation. But to reduce it to purely one or the other is to miss the full human picture. What we can say with confidence: the women who chose this life were rarely passive. They were professionals, artists, strategists of atmosphere. The 20th century was not kind to the geisha world. After many decades of prosperity, geisha began to feel the effects of westernization after the Meiji period and onward. The dramatic decline in leisure time and resources during World War II decimated the hanamachi where geisha worked, and in practically all parts of Japan, it became impossible to stay in operation. Even after the war ended, relatively few places reopened. From 80,000 to around 1,000 today, a 98% collapse. But here is what the numbers miss. Geisha did not simply fade, they adapted. The story of geisha in the interwar period is not one of decline, but of transformation. Far from clinging passively to tradition, many geisha embraced new opportunities for expression. They created grand public dance spectacles that drew huge audiences, appeared in radio broadcasts and phonograph recordings, and even appeared in early cinema. In doing so, they brought geisha performance into Japan's broader cultural conversation. Geisha on the radio, geisha in silent films. A tradition 300 years old, learning to speak in new languages without losing its own voice. This, arguably, is the deepest skill of the geisha world. Not any single art form, but the art of continuation. Of remaining yourself while the world insists you become something else. Today, there are around 1,000 geisha in Japan, most of whom work in Kyoto, often attending gatherings at tea houses and ryute, a kind of luxurious Japanese restaurant. There are 5 geisha districts in Kyoto where geisha work, creating an ecosystem based in traditional culture that includes other businesses which provide necessities for customers, tea houses, banquet halls, tatami mat makers, skilled carpenters, and craftspeople who provide elaborate kimono and their various accessories. An entire micro-economy. A world that requires not just performers, but wig artisans, kimono dyers, instrument makers, and tea masters. The geisha is not just an artist. She is the center of a living ecosystem. The number of geisha dropped somewhat in recent years due to the pandemic. Young women can still apply to become Maiko. Even some Japanese American women have done so and shared their journey on social media. But like many industries tied to traditional culture, there is plateauing interest. And there is a new threat, one nobody could have predicted 300 years ago. The smartphone. Kyoto's Gion district was flooded with tourists unaware of or purposefully turning a blind eye to etiquette and rules. After Gion residents filed complaints against what they termed unruly tourists, the local government instituted a tourist ban that went into effect in 2024. Kyoto is not a theme park, the local council said. The fines for trespassing are listed at up to 10,000 yuan. The irony is almost painful. Geisha and Maiko are often subjected to photos against their consent, even with numerous signs posted around Kyoto that clearly state the rules and the fines for infractions. The very thing that was supposed to share Japanese culture with the world, global tourism, became one of the biggest threats to it. What we think we know about geisha. Mysterious woman, white face, ancient Japan. Probably something else we shouldn't say out loud. Here is what they actually are. The longest-running, most rigorously trained, most repeatedly misunderstood living art form on Earth. They survived feudal collapse, Western occupation, 2 world wars, a global pandemic, and now the selfie stick. They are not relics. They are not museum pieces. They are artists in dialogue with history, place, community, and change. The geisha survived because she understood something that most of us forget: the difference between transformation and loss. You can change how you speak without forgetting your language. You can let the world in without letting it change who you are. The word gay art doesn't just mean a skill. It means something you have made so deeply yours that it cannot be taken from you. That is not a Japanese idea. That is a human one. The geisha tradition is one of the few cases in history where an institution primarily involving women actually gave women more negotiating power than the surrounding society did. That complexity is almost always lost in translation. The story is flattened, reduced to either victimhood or fantasy, and both are wrong. This has been Shishel. Thank you for watching. And this was the real story of the geisha, a story of professionalism, adaptation, and the quiet, stubborn power of craft.